introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Joel Dreyer. Dreyer, I keep thinking it's Dwyer, but it's Dreyer. He is executive director of the Illinois Historical Art Project, and their job is to, or their mission is to study not only Illinois artists and projects, but also Chicago artists. So actually Chicago is my hometown, so I'm really anxious to hear everything you have to say here today. He's going to talk about our beautiful and unique murals that are over 125 years old and as beautiful today as the day they were painted. So again, without further ado, I welcome Mr. Dreyer.
So we'll see how much I forget today. I forgot my cufflinks down in New York. So I figured, well, I just have to wear my sweater. That'll let me go. Well, if this is going to move, I might actually move it. No, it won't. Okay. Morning. Good afternoon. Sorry. So you might wonder how I came to the library. My first visit to the library was 1998 in August, when Marlene was director, right? And I came with my twin boys, who are now 24, and my wife, and we came to look at art throughout Connecticut. So we were going on an art tour with two little book keys attached to our fronts, and purposely came here because I knew of the Oliver Dennett Grover murals, and I'm Oliver Dennett Grover's biographer. And I was just stunned by the beauty of the murals in the building and whatnot. So that was my first trip. And then I'll tell you how Marlene led to another really interesting story in the presentation. Just because I visited, she reached back out to me maybe a year later, and then something really, sure, I can. If I can get this out, I'll make it really loud. No, you think we can get this out, or you think it's stuck? Nobody ever accused me of being a soft talker. Thank you. My wife says I mumble. So I'll get into the interesting story that came along with meeting Marlene and my first time. My second time here was today. I'm just stunned by the beauty of the building. Again, I have much more gray hair, and it's just an incredible place. I know and hope you all cherish it. It's phenomenal. I walked to town. It's a town of 28,000 people, Mr. Google told me, and an incredible town. So just what a gem, and I'm so pleased to be here. So thanks for coming. So the life and times of Oliver Dennett Grover, or as I like to say, the donor, the architect, and the artist. Not many of you may know, or you may know the history, but there was a large residence on this property, and Timothy Blackstone acquired that residence in 1890 for the library. In 1893, just after the World's Columbian Exposition, he hired Solon Beeman, Chicago architect, to design this beautiful edifice. I came in early 1896 to approve the construction, and then the library was dedicated with thousands. I think my number said close to 5,000 books, give or take off, but 5,000 books, a $300,000 endowment, and this building. And the endowment, as I've learned today from Pat and Karen, still lives and is in the many millions of dollars, which is wonderful, to support different projects here. So something that Mr. Blackstone did a long time ago lives on. So Timothy Blackstone was born in Brantford, and he was born on a farm with, grew up with a very limited education. His family moved west. That's where the opportunity was. If you look back at his birthday, 1829. Does anybody want to guess when the city of Chicago was incorporated? No, no cheating. Anybody? That's a great guess. 8 years off, 1832. It was just prairie. Chicago means wild onions in the native Illini Indian tongue. So he was born 1829 here and moved out to make his fortune with his family. And of course, his father was very prominent. So limited education. He joined the railroad out as just a working hand. And he then studied, intelligent as he was, to become a civil engineer. And he started working for the Illinois Central Railway, which was really the largest railroad system in the Midwest and in a massive system. He moved to LaSalle, Illinois. So if you look at Lake Michigan, and you see Chicago's along the lake, and you go about 90 miles west and about 60 miles south, you're in LaSalle, Illinois, which is a town about the size of Brantford. So he became the mayor there. He became the chief engineer at the Illinois Central Railway. And so so he was born in 1820-ish. So this is somebody in his late 30s. 1861, he became president, 5 years after he joined the railway as an engineer, of the Alton and Chicago Railway, which was another major system that served the entire grain merchant and the timber and everything all over through St. Louis and kind of following the Mississippi River. And interestingly enough, the first Pullman sleeper car, I took the Amtrak up here and the last car was a sleeper car. The first Pullman sleeper car was on an Alton Railroad coach. He became then the first president of the Chicago Stockyards. That's hard to describe today, but the Chicago Stockyards was the largest stockyards for cattle slaughter in the country and was affiliated or owned part of other stockyards in Omaha, St. Louis, and other places. So the wealth that came with being the president of the Chicago Stockyards was pretty astounding. And interestingly enough, that wealth still exists 4 generations after. In Chicago, we have the Armours and the Swifts, and Gustavus Swift was the first one to figure out how to refrigerate beef on rail cars. And that's where he made his fortune, bringing slaughtered beef up into the larger cities. And the other thing that's really interesting about Mr. Blackstone is he was trusted to be the executor of many wealthy Chicagoans' estates. So that is somebody who, of course, then is held in very high esteem by his peers. So there's a beautiful picture of him, aged. $300,000 for the building and $300,000 for the endowment. In Chicago, of course, we have the Art Institute of Chicago. If you've been to Chicago, maybe you visited, he gave the Blackstone Hall there, which is a big, long hall off the main building. He died in 1910, buried in Norwich. And his estate at the time was valued at $6 million in 1910. So we know if you were a millionaire in 1910, you were fabulously wealthy. So he was 6 times fabulously wealthy, basically.
Why did he decide to donate here?
Because he was born and raised here and his father had a career here.
Oh, okay. How did he end up in Norwich?
How did he end up being buried in Norwich? Don't know. Would you research that and let us? Have emails, yeah. So today on South Michigan Avenue is a really beautiful late or early 20th century hotel called the Blackstone Hotel. It's quite elegant, quite beautiful, and that's on the site of his mansion, where his previous was the south side of Chicago in the near by the loop was where the wealth was. And his widow donated the Blackstone Library in Chicago. We'll come to that a little bit later. How am I doing on time? So does anybody have to be any place? Perfect. Because I could talk all day. So in the Tribune, this is what they had to say about Timothy Blackstone in accolade to him upon his death. This was quoted one of his friends. And I don't read, but I'm going to read this. So I considered Mr. Blackstone the ablest businessman I ever knew. He was just and a most unselfish man. He built to the memory of his father probably the finest monument that has been built on this continent. His father's name is perpetuated in marble and upon canvas in a most beautiful library building and music hall. Did we learn who the artist was? His father's, or of Timothy's portrait?
Yes, I have it. It's in one of our architectural pamphlets.
Okay, great. We'll find out before we go. And the portraits, of course, are in the two anterooms. He endowed the library to be maintained for all time, and there is not a mark on it to indicate that he had anything to do with it. So, selfless donor. The architect. So the architect, Solon Beeman, lasted 61 years, I guess at that time, that's pretty good. And he was the lead architect for the Pullman community that had over 1,000 buildings. So today on the south side of Chicago by the water, the deep south side, is the old Pullman community. And that's where all the Pullman rail cars were built. And that's where all the factory workers lived. And the stores and everything was a self-contained unit for the building of Pullman rail cars. He also worked for several of the wealthiest Chicagoans building their mansions. And he was involved in several other projects. Who can tell me what building this is? Right? State Capitol, right? So Beeman was under Richard Upjohn as one of the architects on this fantastic building. Do we have a pointer? Oh, we do. Does this work? Do I just press it like this? I love it. Okay. So look at the Gothic details everywhere you go. I mean, this is about as Gothic, this is Romanesque here. This is about as Gothic as it comes, right? And this was the style at the time, the style they thought would be very stately. Then Solon Beeman on his own as an architect, he designed this building in Milwaukee. So this is the Pabst Blue Ribbon Brewing Company's building in downtown Milwaukee. You can see the streetcar there. And look at this Gothic details, right? Very, very similar to the state capitol. They almost look similar. And then this is Chicago's Grand Central Station. And this is losing those Gothic details, but I can see a motor car here that looks to me like it's maybe 1910, 1915-ish, and all lined up here. So we can see kind of how the architecture was losing its Gothic nature and becoming more modern. And this was also designed by Solon Beeman in Chicago. This has since been torn down. Solon Beeman in 1893, who remembers the name of that World's Fair? I said it earlier. Chicago, but Columbian, right? What was it celebrating? Oh, you're from Chicago. That's right. That's right. Celebrated the 400th year anniversary of Columbus not coming to the United States of America. Right? So does anybody know how many trips he made west? Anybody know? He made 4 trips west, exactly. And never landed on the mainland. A lot of people don't know that. He landed in Cuba, Jamaica, and other parts like that, but he never made it to, right? And today, right, there you go. Oh, actually, he's got a part of his burials in a tomb in Spain, right? In Sevilla. I've seen the what do you call it? The burial monument, interesting enough. And little known fact, anytime you see anything in the United States that's named Columbia or Columbian, it's named after Christopher Columbus. District of Columbia, right? That comes after Columbus, because there really was no Columbia or Columbian until his family and until he came here and he became well known. So this is a Solon Beeman building, and this is the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago. If you're really from Chicago, you say Chicago. Right? I'm from Northern Illinois. And just look at the monumental design. This building, if we look at the scale of the people, is immense. This was a massive project that was awarded to Beeman because of his architectural capability and prowess. And there were multiple buildings of this size at the World's Fair. But just to think how important of an architect he was to have been given the commission to do this building. And here again is the inside of this building, and it's stupendously large. There was a lot of mining equipment back over here, including the steam engines that were used to shovel out ore, things of that nature. So very, very well noted architect. And again, this is 1893. He was also the architect of the Brantford Library. No, I mean, this is the Merchant Taylor's building, right? Looks like the Brantford Library, doesn't it? Shocking, isn't it? So this was done in 1893. Now, this is a colorized version of a black and white, as the colorized author saw fit to show this. You can even see the chairs are brown wood with cane webbing, and the beautiful blue water, part of the lagoon, and of course all the greenery. But doesn't this just look like the Brantford Museum? 1893, kind of shocking. And especially so, what do we notice here? So those Ionic columns are beautifully presented in the front of this library. And we're going to see this theme run on multiple occasions. And you can see here it says Merchants Tailor. So the Merchants Tailors, this was all of the tailor trades in the National Trade Association for people who were in the tailoring business, owned tailoring business, or in the clothing business. Here's another Solon Beeman design in Chicago. It says right here, Second Church of Christ Scientist in Chicago. Again, it looks like the Brantford Library, doesn't it? In many ways. And again, here are our Ionic columns. Gas lamps. And here is the 1904 Blackstone Library. His widow donated the funds, and Solon Beeman was the architect, and Oliver Dennett Grover again did the murals. So if you go to Chicago and go to the Timothy Blackstone Library, you will see a relative carbon copy of your own library, along with these fantastic murals, which I'll show you later. So Beeman found something and it worked really well for him, especially these ionic columns. Once you're good at something, you continue to do it over and over. So here's our library. Old picture, right? Still maybe just finishing construction, as maybe the front here isn't quite completed. Certainly there's no driveway, porte cochere. As you all know, it's Tennessee white marble, and the beauty about that Tennessee white marble is it's got this soft rose glow to it. So it's quite a stately marble. Again, classic, right? It's completely a classic building. The diameter of the dome, 32 feet, 8 panels, and the designs for the mural panels were exhibited in 1893 at the Art Institute of Chicago. It's the Chicago Architectural Club. So the Chicago Architectural Club was the corpus body of architects in Chicago, and Chicago was a booming town at the time, well over 1 million people in 1893. And the Art Institute of Chicago then also very well respected architects. So the Art Institute of Chicago hosted the annual exhibition by the architects, Chicago Architects Club. Very important show, very thick brochures with lots of advertising, lots of designs for all of the architects in Chicago that were busy presenting and doing things, including artists that were designing works for architectural masterpieces. So Grover's cartoons or drawings for the Rotunda appeared in that 1893 exhibit. I don't know if you've seen these pictures or not, but I found them on your website. I could have asked for them, but I love the site here and the houses in the background there, right? And just as it's going up, it's great. It's really great to see this. This, by the way, a little sign here, as we see a little gray, it said no admittance. I thought it wasn't very welcoming, so I blocked it out. And here again, the front, beautiful, just beautiful images. And proud workers, they're all posing right there. Say cheese. Here, more construction coming along. The dome having recently been placed. The workmen working up above. You can see the brickwork here. Of course, that's plastered over. Kind of give you an idea of how this was laid and set. And look at that. Ionic columns. So, and here's our beautiful library, complete with this circular drive with porte cochere, although there's nothing over the top of it. And I don't imagine that tree's there anymore. But, just beautiful color rendition. I don't remember, maybe this might have been from a postcard. And the same, writing at the top. And it looks identical today, only it's a lot cleaner than this. So, what do we have here? We've got the Merchant's Taylor, 1893. We've got the Brantford Library, 1896. We've got the Blackstone Library, 1904. I think the Christian Science building was around 1900, 1902. So it's amazing. You'd never think how similar your library is to two other extant structures. This was torn down because the buildings at the World's Columbian Exposition were not designed to last. They were made of a straw and plaster and woodwork. The only building that was built to last, there's 2 buildings that were built to last. One was the Art Institute of Chicago that was constructed in 1892, was for the World's Congresses. So the World's Congress of Religion, They had the World's Congress of Politics. They had the World's Congresses of many topics of science. And it was built to last because they knew they would give it to the Art Institute. It's on Chicago Park District land after the fair was over. And the other building that was built to last is today's Museum of Science and Industry. So if anybody's been to Chicago, this massive, massive Museum of Science and Industry was built to last because it needed to be fireproof because it housed all of the artworks. It was the Fine Arts Palace. And I'll point to something that comes from the Fine Arts Palace a little bit later here. So this building is no longer extant, but of course, these two are. And now the artist. So Grover lasted, what is that? 49, 60, 76 years? Is that right? Is that right? No, 74 years? 64 years. I'm a retired financial executive. You think I can add? So there's Oliver. I suspect people call him either Oliver or Ollie, but today everybody calls him Oliver Dennett Grover. Not quite sure why, but early in his career, he was a cyclorama painter. We're going to get into cycloramas. He married a woman from Detroit whose brother he had met while he was studying overseas. They were from a fairly well-to-do Detroit family of jewelers. In 1892, he won the Charles Tyson Yerkes Prize. And at the time, Mr. Yerkes was one of Chicago's wealthiest people. He was the one that had consolidated all of the streetcars into one system for transportation in Chicago. I will also get into this prize. The Merchants Taylor building we talked about, and the monumental panels that he made for the Merchants Taylor building. He did win a medal at the World's Columbian Exposition, so very well decorated. And he also won a medal at the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. Now the bonus question is, can anybody tell me the name? There's two names of that World's Fair. Right? See, it's west of Ohio, so if you're from Connecticut, so that was called the Louisiana Purchase, right? And it was honoring and celebrating the Louisiana Purchase. I think it was about the same time. It was in 1804 when we made the Louisiana Purchase. So the fair was held in 1904, but it was actually formally called the Universal Exposition. Little trivia tidbits there. So this is, again, I'll read. I hope I've been doing a good job of not reading. This is what was said of Oliver Dennett Grover. He was a polished gentleman in the sincerest sense. Gentle, generous, just, jovial, wise, cultured, kindly, and always questing for beauty. As his biographer, I can tell you from all I've read, all these things are true. He was as extraordinary an artist as one could find. You can judge for yourself a little later. As a painter, he ranked among our foremost, and he was indeed one of the most important painters ever to practice in Chicago. So he was educated in this town. This is the town today, of Earlville, Illinois, which is fast becoming a suburb. His father, very successful. In 1870, well, let's see, let me get those dates right. So yeah, in 1870, the Chicago Academy of Design was founded. It burned in 1871 because we had a huge fire in October of 71 in Chicago, burned the city to the ground. and then it was rebuilt. And in 1876, Oliver attended the Chicago Academy of Design, which is what would be like our National Academy of Design in New York. So this was the preeminent art instructing school. And then, like so many people who had German heritage, he went to Germany to study. And he studied at the Munich Royal Academy, which is where all people who went to Germany who were capable in both German and art studied. The #1 speaking language in Chicago was German. And there was a push for it to become the official language, but of course, that didn't happen. He made his way from the Munich Royal Academy, where he met several others who were on their way, including Frank Duveneck, who were on their way to Italy. And so Frank Duveneck from Cincinnati, another very German town, and a trade town, of course, it's on the Ohio River. He met Frank Duveneck, and Frank was several years his senior, quite accomplished, and he went to Florence and studied at Florence. There he met Whistler, James Abbott McNeill Whistler, one of our greatest artists. And then, like so many other Americans, he made his way to Paris. He studied at the Academy Julian, which was a very, very popular academy. And basically, if you wanted to study in Paris at the École des Beaux-Arts, you had to be fluent in French and pass a French test. So if you weren't fluent in French, your next choice was going to be the Academy Julian. And that was Rudolph Julian ran this academy for several decades. Some of the best painters in America were trained there as well. So he had quite a good, solid base of education as an artist. So here's Whistler's mother. Now in December, I went and visited Whistler's mother again. Okay, can anybody tell me where Whistler's mother is? Paris? That's good. It traveled once there. Yes, no, it's in Paris, not in the Louvre. What? The train station, what's it called? Musée d'Orsay, right? With the big clock in the cafe, the big glass clock. So that's Whistler's mother is there. And by the way, the painting is about the size of the screen, maybe a little bit smaller. It's huge. And here is Grover later in his life painting a gentleman he knows who's looking at a portfolio of prints with art. Some people say this is Grover's self-portrait. The print on the wall, you know, the high baseboard, sitting in the chair, facing one or facing the other. And Whistler and Grover followed Duveneck to Venice in 1879 and 1880, and Whistler was there. Whistler was broke at the time because he had won his lawsuit, a libel lawsuit, when John Ruskin had accused Whistler of throwing a pot of paint on the canvas. And so Whistler said, well, that's libel. So he sued him and he won $1. And his legal fees were so high that he was basically broke. And so he made his way to Venice. At the same time, Grover was there and Duveneck was there. That was 1879, 1880. So again, a very interesting kind of connectivity and background. And we'll see a little bit more influence of Whistler and this kind of portraiture a little later. Now I've given you like 3 or 4 little laters to try to keep you with it, right? Okay. That's exactly right. Thank you. Arrangement, gray and black. Do we hand out cookies? No?
Is that the name of what's the mother?
Yes. Arrangement in gray and black.
Why is that such an iconic part?
Well, great. That's a great question. You didn't do portraiture like this in the early 1880s, I think is when this was completed. No, actually, maybe this was in the mid 1870s. Google knows. You didn't do portraiture like this. Plus, it was shocking in that it was just gray and black. I mean, there was virtually no color except for her face and this black gown that goes through here. So we know why it was called gray and black, but it was so important and considered so important today because it was groundbreaking. It was new. It was something that had never really been thought of before. And so that's why today it's considered to be such a masterpiece. And generally with art, I mean, we've all seen art that we could say, I could do that, but it was done in 1913 before anybody else thought of doing it, which makes it important. So I told you about my visit, 97, that's wrong, it's 98, because my kids were born in December of 97. And Marlene contacted me later, probably a year later. There was an auction house in upstate New York, a town of 5,000 people. I'm losing the name of it. Small little auction house, and they'd sent Marlene a flyer back when we used the US mail. And the flyer said, Oliver Dennett Grover's Thy Will Be Done. It will be at auction. So Marlene said, well, we're not going to buy it, but maybe Joel will be interested. So she called me and then she sent along the notice, which I thought was fantastic. So I contacted the auction house and I was traveling. And so I couldn't really get there. So what I did was I overnighted them a box camera, literally. Remember the box cameras? And I said, would you please take a bunch of pictures of it? Here's a return label, send it back to me. I went to the development studio and I got the pictures developed because there's no other way to see it. There was no, hey mom, talk to your grandson. And it just didn't exist. And they didn't have any photographs of it. So I got on the phone. I wrote a really funny paper. If you're taking notes, if you go to CHILIT.org and you look up papers by authors, and you look up under my name, there's a paper I wrote and presented on buying this painting because it was very eventful. Talking to this little auction house on the phone, trying to buy the painting at auction. So maybe you'll let everybody know. I think it's called Again and Again. I think that's the name of the paper. Okay. I've written so many papers for the Chicago Literary Club. Actually, I'm presenting Monday. Anybody wants to come to Chicago and have dinner and see my paper and listen to my paper, I'll be presenting Monday night. So I contacted my bid and I bought this work. Well, here we are. Here's Whistler again, right? This is the Whistler influence. And this is called Thy Will Be Done. And what's happening in this painting? She's looking up to the heavens. She's holding here crumpled paper, envelope on the ground. Leave it to the viewer as to what's happening. Hard to know, but that's one of the beauties of the painting. It's just hard to know. But look, again, this is an arrangement in gray and black, Whistler's mother. And it's got these very linear lines, just like Whistler, all this black. The only real color we see is the face. We see a little here, right? And it's got the same Whistler color palette. Now this painting was the most famous painting in Chicago. Absolutely the most famous painting in Chicago. The reason why it was the most famous painting in Chicago is in 1893, we had the World's Fair, but in 1892, before the fair happened, Charles Tyson Yerkes, who I mentioned before, gave the astonishing prize of $500 to the winner of the annual Chicago Society of Artists exhibition. That was our greatest art organization, very difficult to gain membership. Only the best artists were members there. And he gave this $500 prize. Well, this painting won that prize. And then it was exhibited in 1893 at the World's Fair, Palace of Fine Arts, the Columbian Exposition. Well, interestingly enough, in 1993, the Smithsonian came out with a book called Revisiting the Fair. And what they did was they went and they found every painting they could find that was exhibited in the Palace of Fine Arts. And they did a big, thick book on this. And the Monets and the Whistlers and all the paintings that were shown in Chicago, and they tried to locate like 100 of these paintings and bring them to the National Gallery, have an exhibition. It was a monumental book and also very scholarly because it was talking about all the various paintings and documenting the paintings that were there in one place. Well, this was unlocated. Remember, it's 1893, 1993. I bought it at auction in 1998. It was unlocated. Why? Well, in 1893, Chicago and the country was in a terrible depression, as bad as the 1933 depression. And it started around 1891. It lasted for a good 6 or 7 years. Grover never would have sold this painting, never. Why? He would have taken this painting, he would have sent it to St. Louis, their annual exhibition, he would have sent it to Cincinnati, he would have sent it to Toledo, to Cleveland, he would have held on to it, sent it to the World's Fair in Buffalo in 1901, he would have sent it to the World's Fair in St. Louis in 1904. Why? Because it's a prize-winning painting and it generates a lot of interest, and he's in the business of selling his art. So this is going to be his big sales pitch. Big sales pitch. He sold it. He sold it from the World's Fair in 1893 to a gentleman who lived in this small town in upstate New York. And when that gentleman passed away in the 60s or 50s, maybe 50s, a local hairdresser who was an antique collector bought it. And when he was very elderly in his 80s, 90s, his estate was sold at auction where I bought it, which is why the painting was unlocated by the Smithsonian in 1993. Interesting story. And I bought it because Marlene contacted me because they contacted her. Yes.
Is it in your home now, or did you give it to it?
Yes, it's Sid. Yeah, thank you. Is it in a museum today? Yes. So it's been donated to a museum, and actually there's two, it's not exactly done yet. It's either the Newbury Library's art collection or the Illinois State Museum. Haven't quite determined it yet, but it's moving around. Newbury Library in Chicago. Oh, so if you come to Chicago on Monday night, the Newbury Library features in my discussion. I mean, it's worth flying out just for that. Yes.
Part of us will be there.
Oh.
The Newbury Library is built with Stony Creek granite.
Ah, Stony Creek granite. So the Newbury Library is built to Stony Creek granite. Wow. Yeah, interesting. Beautiful library. And a great story about that library as well. Yes. I paid $9,000, and I remember that too. Yeah.
What do you think it might go for at auction?
At auction today, well, you got to find the right buyer. If somebody who's going to appreciate it, and it's not Whistler. So I'm thinking, my guess is by the way, it's life size. It's this tall. My guess is, 60 or 70,000, something like that. Not like huge, but a lot of money for sure. And when I got it, I sent it immediately to my conservator. So they cleaned it gently. I took all the old varnish off of it, and it was in its original frame. Now that's shocking. It's shocking to find a painting that's 100 and some years old in its original frame. And because the two you have here in the original frames, because they've been hanging here all this time. but this had moved around. And so the frame was a little bit warped. So I had a framer attach wood to the back to straighten it out, and it still had the label on it. Thy will be done, Charles Tyson Yerkes Prize, 1892. That's how the auction knew the name of the piece, and that's when they started looking up in reference books and found it. So that was because of Marlene and this artist who did our Rotunda. Okay, promised you to come back. So here's Oliver Dennett Grover. This was a portrait of him when he was named associate of the National Academy of Design in New York. You have to present a self-portrait. And this is Grover here. This is the well-noted sculpture in the Midwest, Laredo Taft. This is Ralph Elmer Clarkson, who's originally from Connecticut and made his way to Chicago. And this is Charles Francis Brown, who's originally from Massachusetts, made his way to Chicago. And this was known as the critical triumvirate. And so in 1894, all of the Impressionist works that had hung around Chicago after the close of the fair were exhibited at the Art Institute. It raised a huge storm of controversy because people in 1894 were not used to Impressionism. You just think of, you know, dabs of color and things like that. That's not what people are used to seeing. So it raised a lot of controversy. The critical triumvirate, who of course are all studied in Europe, who had seen all this before, who were very worldly, came out with a pamphlet, but they didn't say who they were. So one was the esteemed sculptor, one was the esteemed painter, one was the other painter, blah, blah, blah. A very, very famous pamphlet that they published critiquing that 1894 show. And I'll show you a piece from that show by our Grover here. So what these are four of the greatest Chicago artists ever to live, Grover being one of them. So Grover was also a teacher, and you can see here he was teaching at Florence. He did teach at the School of the Art Institute in London. This is the Chicago Academy of Fine Arts, which was a competitor to the School of the Art Institute, and his own school in Florence. And here is an old postcard of the Art Institute. These lions that are on both sides here, you can't see the other one. These are still here. We put holiday wreaths over them during Christmas time. And the Blackstone edition comes all the way out here now. This is all outdoor courtyard because the Blackstone edition is huge coming off the Art Institute of Chicago, and this is Michigan Avenue. So Grover was already showing an incredible refined style. Excuse me. This is one of his better known works called Harem Scene, but you can see just the rich, lush detail, and you can see why, if the viewing public was used to this, what a shock Impressionism was. And really, Chicago didn't see much of Impressionism until the World's Fair in 1893, and then you still had to go to the Palace of Fine Arts to see the Impressionism. So it was still well unknown, but you can just already see how talented Grover is at this point in time as a painter, and the rich detail that's done here, and the figure in the back here, and it's just incredibly beautifully done. Looks like she's smoking a hookah pipe too. So this is Grover's. Unfortunately, this is my worst slide. I hope the slides are good for you all, but this is my worst slide. This is Grover painting a scene at the Columbian Exposition, 1893. And if you look at this building right here, I'm going to show it to you a little bit later, well, really soon. This is the administration building at the World's Fair. But very interesting scene to see how people are dressed. Very good figure painter, as we can tell. Oh, there it is. And there's the administration building. This is Grover's painting from 1893. I own this painting. And remember, the critical triumvirate was talking about Impressionism. And this is one of the paintings that was somewhat lambasted at the exhibition at the Art Institute in 1894, just because it was kind of, you know, the sky wasn't really painted blue. It was more impressionist. There were 3 of these done in a series. And I bought this one years and years ago. He was a portrait artist. This is the great architect of Chicago, Daniel Burnham. So you can see he earned his living through portrait commissions as well, as did most artists. This is him painting in Florence. You can see the impressionist mode here and the brush strokes and how loose the brush strokes are and the impasto and how thick the paint is. This is another painting from Florence. This is a painting I own, which I donated to a museum recently. This is a beautiful painting from Florence. Again, showing you how, you know, capable Grover was as an artist. This is Venice, another beautiful, beautiful artwork. Again, painted in the Impressionist style. This is going to be around 19, does it say there? No, I don't think he's got his data. This is around the just before the turn of the century, late 1890s. Another painting of Venice here. This one's dated 1913. But this mode and style hasn't changed much. Yes.
What were his views on Impressionists in the post-Impressionists?
Yes, his views on he died in 1927, so he didn't see much of the post-impressionists because you know, the impressionists were still going very strong, very favorable, because again, he and the critical triumvirate had traveled all through France and were very worldly in their views and saying, look, this is a new way to paint. This is a new mode. The question was, what was his view of the Impressionists? All right, so, okay, and here's Venice. Again, anybody been here? Did anybody go into the building to the right where the municipal, yeah? Do you know the largest oil painting on canvas in the world is that Tintoretto in that building? I mean, right? It's shocking, but it's the largest oil painting on canvas in the world. Amazing. So Grover lived in Chicago and Florence with his wife. They had no children. Starting in 1898, he summered at a place called Eagle's Nest, and he traveled all of Europe, Western US, Eastern USA. This is Eagle's Nest. This is the Eagle's Nest, and this is the tree. This is actually a photograph. And back here is the Rock River. So this is about 40 minutes south of where I grew up in Northern Illinois. And here is a painting of that Rock River, that bend. This was done in 1902. So this Eagle's Nest colony where Grover was active with the critical triumvirate, Laredo Taft, the great sculptor, Charles Francis Brown, Clarkson. It's marked today by this monumental statue of Chief Blackhawk. And to give you an idea of the scale of the head, here's 2 women. This is around 1910, sitting there by the Blackhawk's head. And then there is the statue. And the reason I love this statue is just look at the kind of stonework. This is rural, very rural. This is outside Oregon, Illinois. It's a tiny little town, maybe a couple thousand people. And this, it was the stone around the concrete to set Chief Blackhawk up. Here's Laredo Taft, part of the critical triumvirate that Grover was part of. Laredo Taft with the sculpture. And here's a later, current day view of it. Just incredible statue. And the campus, so it was a colony, art colony, until Clarkson died, and then it was handed over to Northern Illinois University. So you can visit it today. So here are some of Grover's awards. We already talked about Columbian Art Institute Award. We talked about this. This was the most important Midwest art organization. Prize winner there, won 2 prizes, the Art Institute, then prize, World's Fair in San Francisco, gold medal. And after he died in 1927, he was so well thought of that the Art Institute of Chicago gave a memorial exhibition. Very rarely has that ever happened at the Art Institute. So how did Grover attain the skill to paint these magnificent rotundas? And the answer is a lot of experience. And where did he gain that experience to be a mural painter? Because it's quite a bit different painting an easel and painting a mural. Well, there he is with some of the best known American artists. 9 artists took a full year to paint an 8-ton canvas that was 378 feet long for the Chicago Fire Cyclorama. So this is them sitting in front of it. And I'll get into cycloramas. If you haven't seen a cyclorama, there's one down in Atlanta. If you ever visit Atlanta, it's really phenomenal experience. But a cyclorama was a giant circular building. I'll show you examples of that. And in the foreground, and you sit in the middle, and it turns. Of course, back then it was turned by a steam engine, and it turns slowly. And in the foreground, going out, are actually, if it's the Chicago fire, they're going to show animals who died in the fire. They're going to show some buildings that are burnt that still stand. They're going to show some buildings that are fallen over. They're going to show bricks, but that's going to be from here to the wall. And then past that is going to be this round 378-foot, 8-ton canvas that is going to be all painted with scenes of the fire. So you get this 3-dimensional view. And that's what the cyclorama was. And they were huge, huge hits. Very, very big draws to audiences, and you'll see that here. So here is the Jerusalem cyclorama, the Holy Land. And I drew for you an arrow so you could see the size of the line waiting in the rain to enter the cyclorama building. This was up in Canada, as I recall. And look at the size of the building. There's a person, right? And look at the size of the building. And this was a canvas all the way around. And here's Jerusalem. Here is conservation work going on the mural. And you can see here, and in the foreground, this is wrapped in plastic here. Sorry. So what they would do is they would build a wall. They would have stones. They would have all sorts of items laying around, and then the background would be painted, and you get a view of Jerusalem. Now, what they would do, of course, is you take multiple photographs of Jerusalem, and the artist would translate that onto a canvas, and then we, the visitor, we'd go, we'd pay our 25 cents or a nickel, and we would go in and we would see this amazing thing, and we'd sit on a stage, and we'd get a panoramic view of Jerusalem, someplace we would never, ever visit back at the time. Here's the Gettysburg Battle cyclorama. Look at the crowds. I mean, seriously, it's astounding, the crowds and the size of the building. Yes, there's one in Ontario, I think it is. I'm not much of an expert on cycloramas, but there's one, I think it's in Ontario. There's definitely one in Atlanta today from a Civil War theme, but it's phenomenal. And think, Grover worked on multiple cycloramas. So he's got to be able to paint something that looks realistic for people sitting here and viewing across. And he's painting figure after figure after figure and armaments and whatever it is that's going on, the subject and the theme. And so very, very skilled. Imagine just working years as he worked 3 years as a cyclorama painter, and the Chicago Fire cyclorama painting alone took a full year, 8 artists. So think about the experience he got in his trade. And that's where he really gained experience to do these beautiful murals. So here's some conservation going on, the Civil War battle. I think this is called the Battle of Shiloh. So here's the conservator. They're on the scaffold, hung from the roof, and they're doing conservation on this Rotunda mural. And again, in the foreground, you'd see old cannons, and you'd see dead horses, stuffed taxidermy horses, and you'd see soldiers, or you'd see some soldiers standing like this in battle, some falling over, and that's what this cyclorama would be. And this is reminiscent of what you would see in Atlanta if you visit that cyclorama. This gives you some of the scale. But of course, all these figures and horses, all this had to be painted. So going back to Grover in the Merchant Taylor's building in 1893, Beeman hired Grover to do 8 panels. There's a theme there because there's a rotunda, and the rotunda was probably about 32 feet in diameter, which would fit 8 panels. So as early as 1893, before he did this work, he did 8 panels at the World's Fair for Solon Beeman, the architect, who hired him to do this. And you've seen the sculpture in the basement, right, of Blackstone. Grover did this sculpture. Now the question is, how did Grover sculpt? And the answer is, his best friend was the Midwest's greatest sculptor, Rotunda Taft. So between he and Taft, he learned how to sculpt. And here is a sculpture by Grover.
Is that bad?
Say again?
Oh, it's Blackstone.
Right. So we talked about the architectural club. Here is the catalog cover. Just a quick side note, I and another family office in Chicago funded the Ryerson Library at the Art Institute to scan all of their exhibition catalogs, because they used to just sit up on the shelves and you pull them out and they get worn. And today you can see almost all of the Art Institute's exhibition catalogs going back to 1882. And this is one of those exhibition catalogs that was scanned. And again, you can see the year of this. So we talked about Solon Beeman's designs in 1893 for this building at the Chicago Architectural Club. Now we've got Grover's designs for the Rotunda at the Chicago Architects Club 2 years later in 1895. Make sense? So in decoration, Grover has 2 of the designs for the library, for the dome of the library, which are strong, simple, fresh in color, conceived in a true decorative spirit. That's what one newspaper article said about this exhibition. So what are these, right? We know these by name, but they start at the beginning of print making, between the papyrus and recording, Iliad, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all the way to 1895, which is fascinating when you go up upstairs and look at the rotunda and see how everybody's dressed differently, which is really interesting just to see how Grover came up with the costuming for all these people. So here are sketches in the Chicago Tribune. You didn't know how famous your murals were back then. So here's the gathering of the papyrus. It's a sketch. And here's recording the ancient Egyptians. So we can see them here. Of course, this is a very old photograph. And here's 2 more illustrations from a different newspaper. And this one actually tells us what it is, a reading from the Iliad medieval monks making illuminated manuscripts, but there they are as well. These are from the Tribune. I don't think the other ones were from the Tribune. Let's see, that's backwards. Oh, they are. Okay, so these are later illustrated. So incredibly so, back in Chicago, this work was getting great attention because look at the size of this illustration. You open up the newspaper and you see these illustrations in the newspaper. I mean, they don't, they contributed significant space to these illustrations just to show the readers of Chicago, a metropolis of well over 1 million people at the time, what Grover's up to in Brantford, Connecticut. And here's some of the older images of these, the Franklin Press, etc. And then also we have the Medallion Portraits. Now you might not know who those portraits are, but here's a list of them and what they're, the works that they did that made them famous. Of course, we know here Beecher Snow and Longfellow, the Supreme Court Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes. And this is an image of the Rotunda before the medallions were painted by Grover and installed. Now we can remember we saw the brickwork earlier up here that was then plastered over and painted. And here is our beautiful Rotunda with the medallions painted. And I have to tell you, I've seen a lot of architecture in the world because my wife and I travel all over the world for art and architecture. That's mostly what we like to do. And this is really one of the most stunning buildings you'll ever find anywhere. Size, scale, right? It's not the size of the Louvre, okay? We get that, right? But just the size, it's a gemstone. It's an unbelievable gem of a building, inside and out. Every single detail, every piece of wood, the ceiling, it's incredible. And these medallions are, an integral part of that. And the architect thought this up. And even I'll just go back real quick. Look at the stonework, the lattice work. Everywhere you go in this library, just the quiet room. What do we call the quiet room? The reading, but the one you go up the stairs to. The mezzanine, where you walk up the stairs and it says quiet, this is for study only. That was built originally with this ironwork and the iron bookshelves that are there. And the thought process between the ironwork that went into that and the art, it's an unbelievable building. Yes?
Did he paint this in place on a scaffolders?
No, he would paint those on a mural to size, on an easel to size, and then they would go up there with the scaffolding. The workman would go up there and affix it. And they're in remarkably great shape today, too. And so here, just kind of giving you a view of what you already know, but these are just great pictures. This is a postcard. So here is another Rotunda done by Grover. Just beautiful. And this is the Timothy Blackstone Library in Chicago. So I wanted you to be able to see what this looked like because it's really a twin to what we have here. So this is art and the beautiful faces, and she's chiseling here. She's got a paintbrush there, playing the harp. There's a ionic column. I mean, Grover even painted, yeah, right there, right? Grover even painted an ionic column. It's unbelievable. Look above, it's incredible. It's like, wow, 1904. This is a lapis lazuli painted lapis lazuli tile background. Now we're going to see this image again. So this is art. We're going to see her again. There she is. Art, literature, right? This study, full painted painting of this man sold at auction not too long ago by Grover. course, when these things sell at auction, the auctioneer has no idea what it is. They have no idea. Because this was done in 1904 and nobody, that history's lost. It's only me, the only one in the world, literally, who knows this. So I had a researcher when I had multiple researchers through the years who were writing a history of Illinois and Chicago painters. And one was a retired professor from York College in England. And he moved back to Illinois where he's from. And I met him researching, and he was researching for me. We were having this discussion about Leonard Wells Volk in 1857 and the art he was doing in Chicago. And then he did this, and then he founded that, blah, 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 blah. And we're having this discussion, the two of us over coffee. And I finally looked at him, I said, Patrick, I said, what, Joel? I said, you realize that we're the only two people in the world who can have this conversation? So great, I saw it at auction, nobody else knew what it was. So this is literature. She's going to feature again in this one. There she is again, shocking. This is science. I love the little baby during the fire there. She's got a hammer. He's holding up a chemical monk. And this is labor. Yeah, look, she's got a train. So that's what you'll see in Chicago. And in the end, I don't know. I don't remember. I'm not sure. And in the end, my last slide, been really nice to stay with me. The success of the library really is its use. So that's it. Doesn't get any better.
We have time. A few more questions if there are any.
No, great.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you, Joel, for this wonderful, not only enlightening, but very entertaining discussion and presentation. So thank you very much, and thank all of you. And thank you, Karen, for arranging this. That's thank you. Enjoy the rest of the day and this beautiful weekend.